Hello, this is Brooks Whittington with halfwheel.com. Today we're taking a look at the S.T.Dupont Cigar Stand Cutter, a product that was introduced at the 2019 IPCPR Convention and Trade Show. Now this retails for $210, although you can find it for about $160 in various places online. And it has two very different functions in one product. Not only is it a cigar cutter, but it is also a cigar stand. And we'll get to that in a minute, but first I thought we'd go through some real quick technical specifications. The actual cutter itself is made entirely of metal except for the black lacquer highlights, as you see here, the finish. The blade is stainless steel. As you can see, only one of the blades move. You have a nice diamond pattern here on top, which is what you pick up and push and to make the blade go up and down. The cutter weighs 4.92 ounces and measures 2.55 inches when it's closed, as you see, but it has an overall length of 2.95 inches when it is fully open, as so. It measures 1.96 inches wide and just 0.4 inches thick. Now, it also has a cigar diameter opening of exactly 0.78 inches, 20 millimeters. So it can cut a 56 ring gauge cigar in half. And you see here, this is a 52. And so it has room to spare on that pretty easily. You can cut the cap of a 60 ring gauge fairly easily without much problem. But a 70 ring gauge, as you see here, is a little bit more of an issue. You can cut a little bit off there, but not really enough to be usable. All right, now that we have the tech specs out of the way, I thought we'd go ahead and cut a cigar and show you how to use that function. So, basically, in order to use the cigar cutter, you basically pick it up, you open up the blade like this, you position the cap into the opening, get it where you want it, push through, and you have a very, very nice clean cut. So you may have noticed that I was a little bit hesitant when I actually picked it up and cut the cigar, and there's a reason behind that. And one of the very few problems I had with this cutter comes down to the fact that I have an issue with a very small issue, and one that's easily worked around, but an issue nevertheless, of the actual blade. While it's not very loose when you're carrying around or something of that nature, when you're trying to actually cut a cigar and you move this blade back and forth, it's very easy to move it slightly as you're cutting the cigar itself, which makes it a little more difficult when you're actually trying to position the cap where you want it. And so, easy workaround I found was to put two of your fingers in between, in the notches here, that basically stops that blade from moving since you're cutting it with your middle finger. You then position the cap where you want it, as you can see. And once you have it where you want it, you remove those two fingers and then cut down, and you have yourself a nice clean cut. A very simple workaround, one that takes a little bit of getting used to when you first start out, but after that, it becomes second nature, and there are no more problems. Now, other than cutting, the other function that this cigar cutter has, and very unique in this regard, is the fact that it can transform into a cigar stand very easily and very securely. In order to do that, you pick up the cigar cutter, and the middle actually moves independently of the sides. You can see there's a line here on either side. And so you take the cigar cutter and move those two ends, the middle and the ends, independently. And it just basically turns into a cigar stand like so. You then can put your cigars, rest of the cigars right on top of there, just like that, nice and securely. It can easily hold Lanceros up to 70 ring gauges cigars, as you can see. There's no problem holding the actual cigars themselves. The only issue that I had, in fact, with the cigar stand was the fact that once the cigar nub gets beyond too small to actually fit within these two sides here, you have a problem because it obviously just won't fit in there, and so it becomes essentially useless. It's about an inch, give or take, between those two ends here. And so it's very, very easy to use, as you can see. I mean, it's just basically pick it up, move those two pieces independently, and then you have yourself a cigar stand. I didn't have any issues with the actual stand moving or anything like that once I put it down. As long as it was on a stable surface to begin with, there were no issues whatsoever with it actually using it, putting the cigar on it. It doesn't move very easily, and it's heavy enough that it's not going to move in the wind or anything of that nature. Very, very useful function, and one that is very well designed in terms of actually making a part of the cutter that you don't need to use if you don't want to. All right, so now we've gone through the technical specifications. I thought I'd go through some good and bad things about the S.T.Dupont Cigar Stand Cutter that I found while I was testing it for about 3.5 weeks. On the list of good things is the cuts. Cuts from this cigar cutter are very, very good. I had virtually no issues whatsoever. They were clean. They were consistent. The blade is sharp and doesn't seem to be getting any duller anytime soon. It's easy to use in terms of pushing it down and how much force you have to push with to get it through the cap. It's just in regards to cuts, it's a very, very good product. It's gorgeous to view and to look at. It's well made, well balanced, and has no issues in terms of construction or anything of that nature. I dropped it a few times, and it didn't seem to phase it at all. I would have no problem, saying that this thing is something that's going to probably not give you any issues whatsoever in terms of actual construction or falling apart or anything of that nature. It looks great visually, and it looks expensive, and it is expensive, which we'll get to in a minute, but it looks great when you pull it out. And finally, really great thing, which we've talked about multiple times now, is the fact that you have two products in one. Not only is it a cutter, very good cutter, but it's also a functional cigar stand, one that is very easy to use, very easy to implement, and works exactly the way that it should. Very stable and very, very nice when you're actually using it as a cigar stand. And the cool thing about this cutter is that you can use either one of those functions independently. You don't have to use it every single time as a cutter and a cigar stand. It will work as either, and you don't even have to use the other function. So, very, very good in that regard. In terms of bad things about this actual cutter, things that I didn't like necessarily, it comes down to a few things, starting off with price. $210 is a lot of money for a cutter. $160, which is $210 is a retail, $160 online in various places, and it's a lot of money for a cutter. Even one as nice as this, even one made in France like this one is, it's just a lot of money, and it's something that you're going to have to justify, even if it does have two different functions in one product. It can only cut cigars up to about 60 ring gauge, which is a problem for larger ring gauge, smokers. Anything above 60 and you're going to start running into some problems. It'll cut anything 60 and below easily. But an 80 ring gauge cigar, you're gonna have some issues with. And so if you smoke those type of cigars, those large cigars, more often than not, this may not be the cutter for you. It's impossible to keep clean. It's a magnet when it comes to dirt and fingerprints and dust. You basically have to wipe it off. If you're going to show it off, you have to wipe it off before you show it off, or it really, really, really doesn't look all that great. It should have come probably with a case of some sort. It does not, and that may help. It would have helped a little bit, but in terms of actually using it, every time you pick it up, it's going to get dirty. And once you realize that, then it's definitely something that you get used to. And finally, as I mentioned when I was actually cutting the cigars, there is a bit of a learning curve when it comes to the process of actually cutting that, because the blade is a little bit looser than I'd like. When you're actually trying to use it as a cutter, you have to find a little bit of a workaround, which I showed you. And my workaround may be different than yours, but once I found that workaround, once I, realized how to use it properly, it was no problem, and it continues to be no problem. It's just getting to that point where you are able to say, okay, now I know the process of how is best to cut for me, and I can go on from there. Once you actually have that process down pat, it's not difficult at all to continue to use it that way. But getting that process is a little bit more annoying than it should have been. And so after all that, can I recommend the S.T.Dupont Cigar Stand Cutter? The answer is yes, 100% I can. The combination of the extremely well-designed cutter that gives very good cuts. I had very few problems with cuts during the entire time I was testing it. And the fact that it is a extremely useful cigar stand, more so than I would think, is a combination that is very unique in the industry that I have seen. It's something that I didn't think I would use all that much. I would thought it was a gimmick when I first saw it. But as I continued testing it, I realized that it was something that is almost ingenious. The idea that you can use this cutter as a cutter if you need to, and then if you don't want to use the cigar stand, you don't have to. You just leave it alone, and that's the end of it. Or if you need a cigar stand, then it's there whenever you need it, easy to implement, and very, very well designed. Not going to tip over. It's very heavy, and it takes care of your cigar. There were some minor issues. The price obviously is an issue. The fact that you have to make sure that you know exactly what you're doing when you're cutting for the first couple of times to get used to it. Once you do that, then it's a very, very simple process. But in the end, it's something that I can easily say is well worth the money if you're looking for a cigar cutter in this price range that is going to last you a very long time and is going to look great while you cut it. And it's going to give you that extra function that most cigar cutters don't give you. So that's my recommendation for halfwheel.com. This is Brooks Whittington. For all of your news, review, and really anything cigar related needs, go to halfwheel.com.